When you hear the term trade deficit, it might sound like a problem, maybe even a crisis. But the truth is more complex. Trade deficits do matter, but not always for the reason you might think. Today we're breaking it all down. What a trade deficit is, why it happens, what it tells us about the economy, and when it's actually a sign of strength, not weakness. So let's start with the basics. What is a trade deficit? A trade deficit happens when a country imports more than it exports. In other words, more money is flowing out of the country to pay for foreign goods and services than is coming from exports. Let's say the US imports about $3 trillion worth of goods and services in a year, but only exports $2 trillion. That's a $1 trillion deficit. US biggest trade deficit partners are China at $279 billion, the EU at $235 billion, and Mexico at $152 billion. It's also known as a negative trade balance. Now, on its face, this might sound like a country that is losing money, but it's not that simple. A trade deficit is not inherently bad, but it does carry consequences, both positive and negative, depending on how it is financed and what it represents. Why trade deficits happen? So why does a trade deficit occur? There are a few big reasons. First, strong consumer demand. When people in a country are doing well, when wages are rising and jobs are steady, they often buy more goods, and a lot of these goods come from overseas. Second, a strong currency. If your currency is strong, foreign goods become cheaper for you, which encourages even more imports. Third, a global supply chain. Today, many companies source parts and materials from all over the world. A trade deficit can simply reflect how deeply interconnected the global economy has become. And finally, investment flows. The US, for example, attracts massive amounts of foreign investment in everything from government bonds to real estate to startup. That money coming in helps finance the trade deficit going out. So yes, a country might have a trade deficit, but might also be the most attractive destination for global capital. Which brings us to the key point. Why trade deficits actually matter. Let's talk about why trade deficits matter. Because they do. But they don't always mean what the politicians or the headlines suggest. Here's why you should pay attention. Number one, it can lead to debt and foreign dependence. If a country is constantly buying more than it sells, it has to fund that gap somehow. Often that means borrowing from abroad or selling of assets to foreign investors. Over time, this can create a situation where a nation is deeply indebted to other countries and vulnerable if those investors pull out. Number two, it might signal weak domestic competitiveness. If a country imports so much because it can't compete globally, then it's a red flag. It might mean local industries are falling behind or that innovation and investments are stagnating. Number three, it can hurt jobs in some sectors. While consumers benefit from cheaper imports, industries like manufacturing may suffer. Factories close, jobs are lost, and certain communities may be disproportionately affected. We've seen this play out in many advanced economies, especially in regions that relied on heavy industry. Number four, it can affect the country's currency. Large trade deficit can put downward pressure on a country's currency over time, as people buy the foreign currency and sell the domestic to facilitate the imports. As the currency weakens, imports become more expensive, potentially driving up inflation. This can create a feedback loop that's hard to escape. So yes, trade deficits can bring real economic consequences, but that's only half of the story. Now here's the nuance. Not all trade deficits are harmful. In fact, some are even signs of a healthy, dynamic economy. Let's look at the US again. For decades, the US has run trade deficits while also maintaining one of the strongest economies in the world. How? Because the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, and because the country is a magnet for foreign investments. Foreign investors see the US as a safe bet. They want to buy American bonds, stocks, property, and technology. That investment helps us finance the trade deficit and boost domestic growth. It's also worth remembering this. A trade deficit means consumers have purchasing power. They have the money. They have the options. And in many cases, they're getting goods cheaper than they could if those products were made domestically. So in that case, a trade deficit reflects economic freedom and choice. So should you be worried about a trade deficit? It depends. What matters most is why it is happening and how it's financed. If it reflects strong investment, innovation, and consumer strength, it might be perfectly sustainable. But if it reflects declining exports, rising debt, and weakened competitiveness, then it's a different story. Trade deficits aren't a yes or a no question. They're a mirror reflecting the deeper currents shaping an economy. And the real challenge is not eliminating trade deficits. It's building a strong, adaptive economy that thrives in a global marketplace. So the next time you hear the words trade deficit, remember this. It's not a scoreboard. It's not always a crisis, but it is indeed a signal that tells us something about how money flows, how industries compete, and how nations are connected in an increasingly global economy. And like any signals, what matters is how we respond. If you'd like to find out more how we at AMP Consulting navigate the global macroeconomy, please contact us at info@advisormanageportfolios.com. We look forward to speaking to you again soon and educating you further. Till next time.